Hi, I'm Mark Lanier, and I want to ask the question with you. Can you prove God exists? Now, true confessions here. I'm a trial lawyer. In other words, for almost 40 years, I've made my living going into courtrooms across the United States of America and occasionally even across the pond in an effort to try to prove one thing or another. You might say, I make a living out of proving things. I've tried cases that prove whether or not someone's been hurt, whether or not someone's been cheated, whether or not a product works effectively, who's more suited to take care of certain property or certain people. I've tried cases about whether or not certain events happened, whether crimes have been done or not been done. I've tried big cases that they've made movies about and written up in the newspapers. I've tried little cases that no one's ever going to hear about. That's what I do. But all of those cases that I try have a central focus, and that is what can be proven or not proven. And so as a result, I've written a number of books where I've put certain belief systems on trial. I put Christianity on trial. I put unbelief on trial and atheism on trial. I put various world religions on trial in a book, World Religions on Trial. It's my quest in my life to try to figure out whether or not some of the big questions in life can be answered with proof. You may hear the expression about a blind leap of faith, the idea that if you want to believe in God or the divine one, you just close your eyes and leap boldly off a cliff and hope and pray that someone or something may catch you before you go splat. I don't believe that I'm interested in leaping blindly off a cliff and putting my faith in something that is not reasoned and thought out and even tested and found to be proven true. So within the framework of that, I like to do three things when I analyze this subject. Those three things are, number one, let's talk about different types of proof. Number two, let's discuss the burden of proof. And then number three, let's actually apply it and see what we come up with. So journey with me through this and let's see if we can address intelligently this question, does God exist and can you prove the existence of God? Now, when it comes to proof, there are different types of proof. I've learned that in the courtroom. Sometimes in a courtroom, I need to prove something by a direct scientific testimony. And so if I've got to prove, for example, that this chemical causes this reaction in the body, there are scientific ways to go about proving that. That's wonderful for science. But it's not good if I want to try and prove whether or not someone loves someone else. There's not any science in the world that's going to give me a scientific test for that. I need a different kind of test. Now, when I do this, it's not different. I'm looking at the desk here around me. Here is a pencil, and this pencil has lead at one end and eraser at the other end. If I want to prove whether or not this pencil will write, I have to use the end with lead. It won't do me any good to use the end with the eraser. By the same token, if I want to prove whether or not this pencil will erase, I need to use the eraser end, not the lead end. It's very simple. We use what we've got that fits what we're trying to prove. So if I wanted to prove the area of a square, or a rectangle, I would multiply the side times the length, and I would get the area of the rectangle. But multiplying the side times the length does not tell me the area of a triangle. It requires a different type of formula. And it certainly doesn't tell me what the temperature is of my water. So we have different types of proof for different things. And when it comes to proving the existence of God, I think that the proof for that is going to be something much more akin to the proof of whether or not, for example, Napoleon was at Waterloo. You say, well, wait a minute. We know Napoleon's at Waterloo. We've got that written in history. Well, who says what's written in history is correct? You know, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, for a while in the media, there were rumors that he was so sick he couldn't make a public appearance. And then there would be pictures of him. And you'd see write-ups where some people say, no, that was a body double. A lot of politicians and political leaders have used body doubles. For a long time, people thought that Paul McCartney was dead and that a substitute Paul McCartney had been found. You can't necessarily just say because it's historical, it's true. You need to try to look at evidence to make the assessment. So the evidence you start to look at may include history, but it's got so much more. Now let's think about this and whether or not God exists. Well, I can't just go back. Some people say, well, you go back somewhere, somehow, something started everything. Okay, that may be true. That makes sense. But then everybody says, well, who started God? Who started everything? And we can devolve into those arguments. I'm not sure that those are the best arguments for proving the existence of God, at least not for me in my mind. Instead, I like to look at things in big question areas. I like to look to see, okay, let me weigh the possibilities against various scenarios. There are kind of two. Either there's a God or there's not. Now, we might fuss about what kind of God there is, but let's say that we're going to limit this to two different possibilities. There is a God or there is no God. Then let's look at life. Let's look at you and me and try to make an assessment of whether or not life makes most sense with there being a God or with there not being a God. That's very much the way we prove things in a courtroom all around the globe. In a legitimate courtroom that is truly built upon justice, bias is stripped away and evidence is analyzed. Now you say, but there's no eyewitness evidence to God. Maybe, maybe not. We can debate that point. But that's not a point that's worth debating because in a courtroom, there are two kinds of testimony. There's eyewitness testimony and there is circumstantial testimony, or eyewitness evidence and circumstantial evidence. And a judge will instruct a jury that both are to be considered. The typical law school example is this. If I go outside and I see that it's raining and I come inside, I can say, based on eyewitness, it is raining. But if instead I don't go outside, instead I'm inside and I hear this pitter-patter, water splashing on the window, and I hear the rumble of thunder, and through the window I see flashes of lightning, and someone comes in from outside with a very drenched raincoat, an umbrella with water sheeting off of it, and wet galoshes that they take off at the door. Now, I don't have eyewitness testimony that it's raining. After all, the water on the window could be a sprinkler gone awry, but the circumstances indicate to me it's raining. That's circumstantial evidence, and that's useful in court. Rarely do you have an eyewitness to a murder, but you'll have circumstantial evidence. It might be fingerprints, it might be time, it might be motive and opportunity, it might be video surveillance of sorts, but those are circumstances. So we take circumstances into account, and we do all of these types of evidence. And then we move to this second concern, a burden of proof. Now, in a courtroom, I have the burden of proving the elements I need to prove if I'm going to win. The defense in a case doesn't have to prove anything at all. The defendant in a case wins if the plaintiff doesn't manage to prove what the plaintiff has to prove. In other words, let's just take a simple car wreck. If I represent Billy Bob, who drives through a green light and gets pie-eyed, gets hit by a car being driven by Vince, and Vince ran the red light when Vince hit Billy Bob, so Billy Bob sues. I have the burden of proving that Vince ran the red light. If I can't prove that Vince did something wrong, I don't win. Vince doesn't have to prove his light was green. Vince just has to see whether or not I can prove that Vince did something wrong. This is the burden of proof. This becomes relevant on the issue of whether or not God can be proven to exist. It's relevant because do I need to prove God exists? Or should someone prove he doesn't exist? You know, a lot of people pick up on the idea that you can't prove a negative. Bertrand Russell, a brilliant logician and an atheist, and someone who readily used this idea that you cannot prove a negative. And in certain areas of logical processing, Russell may be correct. But Russell had a very narrow view of what proof meant. He's talking within his small academic circle of thought. See, in a courtroom, Bertrand Russell could never win a case at all because he could not, in that same logical proof set, prove that I love my wife. Now, I do, but you won't have a logical step-by-step process that would prove it irrevocably and unquestionably to be true. So when we come across someone like Bertrand Russell, who says you can't prove a negative, recognize he's talking within his academic discipline and field. He's not talking in the greater sense of proof. So in the greater sense of proof, we can prove negatives all the time. You know, is there a dragon in my garage? Well, first of all, let's define what a dragon is. Is a dragon an actual being that breathes fire and can fly and seems to be reptilian and of large size? If we get that definition, I can prove whether or not one exists in my garage or garage if I'm in England. I would do it by looking in the garage or the garage to see if there's room for one, number one. Number two, to see if one's there. You say, well, but maybe we're going to define a dragon differently. You know, there are ways to prove a negative. So an issue becomes, do you prove that God exists or do I prove that God doesn't exist? That's an issue. But that brings me to the important third consideration, and that is, how do we apply all of this? And let me tell you how I apply it. I try to look at this world and I try to figure out what makes the most sense of it. I need to find a system, whether there's God or no God, that makes sense of certain things about you and about me. Let me give you what some of those are. One of the things that matters to you and me is justice and fairness. After all, some people say, I don't believe there's a God because children get cancer. I don't believe there's a God because children are born of drug-addled prostitutes who will give that child very little chance of succeeding in the world. Or I don't believe that God exists because people get away with abusing children. I don't believe that God exists because bad things happen to good people. All of those concerns are very legitimate questions that we should use to test whether or not it makes sense that God exists. And I find all of those questions confirm for me the existence of God. You may be saying that seems weird. Well, let me explain why. You and I are hardwired to believe in justice. We believe that things should be just and fair. Our children say it from the earliest age. That's not fair, because we understand fairness really early in life. It's part of what we believe to be true. It's why we say if there's a just and loving God, why would he let these bad things happen to good people? But here's the thing. If there was not a just God who hardwired you and I to believe in justice, then why would we even care? Why would this be an issue? I mean, do you think that the sharks who are eating the other sharks, or for that matter, the tuna in the sea, care about the justice of them eating another fish? Do you think it occurs to the shark, gee, that fish has done nothing wrong, why should I eat that fish? No, it doesn't occur to the sharks. We human beings are uniquely thinking that justice makes a difference. And that's a prime example of something that's just hardwired into us. So the question I have is, did that get hardwired in by God? Or is it just a result of how we've evolved? Well, I have real problems with this. Because if I'm trying to understand who I am and who you are, and I take God out of the equation, then the way we evolved suddenly becomes almost a bit absurd. Who are you and who am I? Well, I guess in a sense, if there's no God, I am a bunch of chemicals that exist in this skin. So I'm a sack of chemicals in this skin. The chemicals ultimately are stardust that is just kind of degraded and maneuvered and transformed and changed and accumulated and dispersed and accumulated. In other words, give us a few billion years, 13 I think is the latest estimate, 13 billion years, and this cosmic stardust becomes the sack of chemicals that somehow has enough electrical spark in it for you to start thinking and for me to start thinking. Well, if that's all we are, why on earth do we care about justice? Why do we care about beauty? Why is there dignity to a human being? Why is it we bury our grandparents when they die or cremate them rather than eat them? Why is it that, after all, there's a lot of protein and calcium in those bones and muscles, but of course we don't eat them. Of course we don't feed them to our animals. We treat them with dignity and respect because we know that we're more than a sack of chemicals to be recycled. I think all of this is an application to me of something very fundamental. You cannot explain you and the world in which we live, and I can't explain me and the world in which I live unless there is a God who gives this world meaning. Now, I recognize that some people may watch this video and they may say, well, I don't see that there's meaning and purpose in this world. And I think the whole world is one that is just rolling down the hill to being defeated, a nihilistic view of life. And if you're there, I want you to know that that's not the only option. That there is an option of meaning and purpose in life, but the option of meaning and purpose in life only is there if God exists. So when you put all of this together, I think the evidence indicates that there's a reason to be positive about life. There's a reason to combat the evil in this world. There's a reason and a purpose to smile today. There's a reason and a purpose behind getting up and going about your day in a creative way. There's a reason to seek relationships and bonding with other people. All of these reasons exist because it's the way God made us. We're not just a sack of chemicals. We're people with meaning and purpose, and that is the right evidence we should be considering when we contemplate, are we cosmic space dust, or are we people created by God for purpose? I think it's the latter, and that's the way I approach it as a lawyer who makes a living out of proving things. I hope you'll look at the rest of the videos that OCCA has, or go online, find my videos, find my books. If you can't afford them, email me. I'll send them to you for free, because these are the most important questions we can be answering in life.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Alonzo here from the OCCA, the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. Behind me, I have a bunch of our team. We are making some content right now. Hey, we can only do this sort of work because of generous people like yourselves. You like things, you subscribe, you share, you follow, and you prayerfully and financially support us. We literally could not do this without you. So we just all wanted to say thank you. Thank you for making this all possible to reach people with the good news of Jesus. Now, if you want to see more of this, you can check out our website, theocca.org. We are putting new content up there all the time. We try to mix it up and do really cool things, but we just wanted to say thank you so much. Go to the website for more fresh, new content, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again. Peace.